When love slipped away. When I came home after working late, my husband was furious. His anger had been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, and tonight it erupted like a volcano. The moment I walked through the door, I felt the weight of his frustration. The air was thick, oppressive, and tense. My steps echoed in the quiet hallway as I set my keys on the table, hoping to avoid another confrontation, but there was no escape. "Where have you been?" His voice pierced through the silence, sharp and cutting. "I told you," I sighed, exhaustion thick in my voice. "I had to stay late at the office. The project deadline." "Don't give me that crap!" he snapped, his voice louder now, filled with fury. His fist came down hard on the table, making me jump. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. His anger had been building for a long time, but this was different. This wasn't just about me working late. It was about everything that had been festering between us for months, maybe even longer. "Why do you always assume the worst?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But I could hear the shakiness in my words. "I'm working hard because we need the money. I'm doing this for us." "For us?" He laughed bitterly, standing up so fast that the chair screeched against the hardwood floor. "You think this is for us? You're doing this for you. I barely see you anymore. When was the last time we even sat down and had a real conversation?" I opened my mouth to respond, but then hesitated, unsure of what to say. He was right. We hadn't spent real time together in weeks, maybe months. My job had consumed me. I had been promoted to a senior role 6 months ago, and ever since I'd been working late nights, weekends, missing family events, and pushing everything aside to meet deadlines and deliver results. It wasn't out of selfishness, though. I thought I was building something for our future. "I'm trying to balance everything," I said, running my fingers through my hair in frustration. "But this job, it's a big deal for me, for us. It's not easy. I'm doing my best." "Your best?" His voice was cold now, not just angry but distant. "You're not even here half the time. You don't see what it's like. I come home to an empty house every night. I'm practically living alone while you're married to your job." The words stung, not because they weren't true, but because deep down, I knew that I had let things slip. I had convinced myself that if I worked hard enough, the sacrifices would pay off. But now, looking at him, I realized that the price might have been too high. "I didn't ask for this promotion," I whispered, feeling the familiar guilt creeping in. "It just happened, and once I got it, I had to prove myself. You know how competitive my field is. I thought you understood." He shook his head, his lips curling into a grim smile. "I did understand, at first. But now, I just feel like I'm competing with your career, and I'm losing." There was a pause, and in that silence, I saw it clearly for the first time, the cracks in our marriage. They had been there for months, maybe longer, but we had both been too busy, too distracted to address them. Now they were too big to ignore. "I love you," I said softly, almost as if I was trying to convince myself as much as him. "You know that, right?" He let out a bitter laugh, the kind that comes from deep disappointment. "Love? It doesn't feel like love anymore. It feels like you're slipping away, and no matter how hard I try, I can't reach you." "I'm still here," I said, my voice pleading now. "I'm just overwhelmed. Work has been crazy, and I know I've been distant, but we can fix this." "Can we?" he asked, his eyes meeting mine for the first time since I walked in. They were filled with something I hadn't seen before: hopelessness. "Because it feels like we've been drifting apart for a long time, and I don't know if we can get back to where we used to be." I blinked back the tears that were threatening to spill over. How had we gotten here? We had been so in love once. When we got married 5 years ago, we couldn't keep our hands off each other. We'd stay up late talking about our dreams, our future, and all the things we wanted to build together. But somewhere along the way, life happened. The pressure of work, the stress of bills, and the never-ending grind of trying to stay afloat in a world that demanded more and more from us had worn us down. I don't want to lose you, I whispered, reaching out to touch his hand, but he pulled away. I don't want to lose you either, he said, his voice softer now, but still filled with pain. But I already feel like I have. That night, he slept in the guest room, and the distance between us felt like a chasm. I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, wondering how things had gotten so bad. I thought back to the beginning of our relationship, to the days when we couldn't stand to be apart for more than a few hours. We used to be so close, so connected. But now it felt like we were living in separate worlds, and no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't bridge the gap. Over the next few days, things between us got worse. He barely spoke to me, and when he did, it was with a coldness that I had never experienced before. The house felt empty, like a shell of what it once was. I threw myself even deeper into work, not because I wanted to, but because it was the only thing I had control over. But even that started to slip through my fingers. My performance at work suffered, and my boss noticed. I was making mistakes, missing deadlines, and losing focus. The pressure was mounting, and I felt like I was on the verge of breaking. Then, one night, he came home late, much later than usual. I had been sitting on the couch, staring at the TV, but not really watching it, when I heard the door open. I looked up to see him standing there, his face pale, his eyes red like he had been crying. "We need to talk," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart sinking. I knew what was coming, but I wasn't ready to face it. "I've been staying at a hotel," he admitted, sitting down across from me. I needed time to think. My stomach churned. "And?" He looked down at his hands, twisting his wedding ring around his finger. "I think we both know this isn't working." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "You're leaving me?" My voice cracked, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. He didn't answer right away, and the silence was deafening. "I don't want to," he said finally, his voice heavy with regret. "But I don't know how to fix this. We've tried, haven't we? We've talked and fought and tried to make it work, but it's like we're on two different paths now." Tears welled up in my eyes, blurring my vision. "I love you," I whispered. "Isn't that enough?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with pain. "Sometimes love isn't enough." His words hung in the air, and for the first time, I felt the finality of it. This wasn't just another fight. This was the end. "I'll stay at the hotel for now," he said, standing up. "We can figure out the details later, but I think some space would be good for both of us." I didn't say anything as he walked toward the door. I couldn't. My throat was tight, and I felt like I was drowning in the weight of everything that was happening. "I'm sorry," he said softly, his hand on the doorknob. "I really am." And then he was gone. The days that followed were some of the darkest of my life. I woke up each morning feeling hollow, like I was just going through the motions. I went to work, came home to an empty house, and cried myself to sleep most nights. I tried to focus on my job, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. The promotion that had once been my dream now felt like a curse. A month passed, and we officially separated. The paperwork came, and I stared at the words, unable to believe that my marriage was ending. I signed them, my hands shaking, knowing that this was the final nail in the coffin. Our love had died a slow, painful death, and there was nothing left to salvage. In the months that followed, I tried to rebuild my life. I threw myself into therapy, trying to understand where things had gone wrong. I learned that I had been so focused on proving myself at work that I had neglected the most important part of my life, my marriage. I had lost sight of the balance, and in doing so, I had lost the person I loved the most. One night, as I sat in my now empty house, I realized that I had been running from the truth for a long time. My marriage hadn't failed because of my job. It had failed because I had let it. I had been too scared to confront the cracks, too proud to admit that I needed help. And now, it was too late. But as I sat there, alone in the quiet, I made a promise to myself. I would learn from this, I would grow, and maybe one day I would find love again. But this time I would know how to hold on to it.